I think I went live this time. I did it a minute ago and it was not listed. Anyway, I woke up this morning uh, and again early, and I got this image uh, in my mind of one of the patients I saw late yesterday afternoon. She was a lady with curly hair, early 60s, and she was telling me that she fired her last cardiologist and the cardiologist before that and the internist before that. And now she's got an internist that she said, I like her. She doesn't really understand what I'm doing, but I'm going to stick with her. She's told me, well, I don't know what's going on with you, but I'll try to read and I'll try to help. Maybe I can read some articles and help you with this. And I said, well, I asked her, why did you fire? And good morning, Bart. Thanks. I asked her, so why did you fire the cardiologist? And I knew where this was going. She said, he said I was killing myself. He didn't like my diet. And I said, he didn't like what you were eating? She said, well, he didn't like what I was not eating. Um, Many of you know. For example, Bart, you know. Truly, good morning. Yes, you know. She's not eating carbs. And her doctor, every time she would see him, would yell at her. He'd get emotional, get frustrated, and say, you're killing yourself with your diet. And uh, her LDL was 252. So those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it's cholesterol. And we're not talking about total cholesterol. We're talking about LDL, which most doctors still think is the quote bad cholesterol. LDL is what they call bad cholesterol. HDL is what they call good cholesterol. Back when I graduated from medical school, a long time ago, 40 years ago, um, the total for the recommendation for LDL cholesterol was 120. Then they decided it was linked with bad things, so they dropped it to 100. More recently, they've dropped it to 70, and a lot of docs try to get it down into the 20s because of the bad things that they've linked to, quote, high LDL. But we knew this 20 years ago. Some people that stop eating carbs, go on a low carb keto diet, their LDL shoots way up. You saw the uh, the chief of Harvard cardiology 10 years ago in Harvard Men's Health on the internet talked about this, and he said, we're not sure that it's bad for people, but it's created a major problem with people getting care. I don't know what's worse, yelling at the patient for a decision that they've made, or just saying, I don't have time to learn about this. I'll do what I can, but I'll, I'll have to read on this, not finding out what's going on. So these patients end up getting high LDL. And we used to think it was like 1 in 500, maybe 1 in 300 people that would get this. When I see patients, it's more like 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 5, 1 in 3. Because we've covered this issue, they're running into problems with their docs, and so they're coming to see us. So it depends on which population you're looking at. This is getting more and more common. The other thing that's happening is a lot of people are saying, hey, I love this diet. What's happening is they're losing 30, 50, 150 pounds. Our typical patient comes in and they've already lost 35 pounds before seeing us. Their blood pressure drops. They feel better. Their A1C drops. Their metabolic markers improve. And yet, guess what? Their doctor's yelling at them, saying, you're killing yourself. So they get mad and they leave their doctor. Now, there was just an article that was published. the article was published by Matt Budoff, David Feldman, Nick Norwitz, Adrian Sotomoda. You know, that team that's looking at this issue. They're calling it lean mass hyperresponder if you're not familiar with this. And they saw some interesting things. You know, up until now, the other side of the debate, the Peter Attias, Thomas Daysprings, I think his name is Tom Schneiderman, and most of the lipidology community, most of the internal medicine community have been looking at this and saying, you don't have anything published. And it's like, do you think these guys are lying or what? So now it's published. Matt Budoff has been considered a known cardiovascular researcher for decades. He does look at fringe things, though. He was involved with the calcium score. And for when that came out, they thought calcium score was fringe. It's not fringe anymore. And no, these folks were not making up this stuff about lean mass hyperresponder. In fact, it really began to gather steam when one of the people that's going to be on our show again, David Feldman, is an engineer, not a doctor, not a lipidologist, not an internist, not a doctor, an engineer, started asking questions. He went on low carb, and when he did, he started feeling better. His metabolism improved, and his LDL, quote, bad cholesterol, started shooting sky high. He admits he was very naive. He thought people would be very interested in this. He started a group called the Citizens Science Foundation. That group started saying, okay, you know what? We're not going to get funding to look at this. In fact, most of the medical community is wanting to tell us to stop this. They're calling us statin deniers. They're saying we're killing ourselves, and they're covering their eyes, turning away, and saying, you're just being bad. Well, they went ahead and started, you know, despite getting beat up on. I'm going to talk for a minute about, I had dinner with Dave a couple of weeks ago. Jesus and I did. And I offered to send Dave a copy of the book, Galileo's Revenge. For those of you who don't know, Galileo was very much involved in the early developments of the telescope. And he began to see, no, the Earth is not the center of the solar system. The government and the religious authorities, both of who were very much related at the time in terms of power, ended up putting some people in jail and actually cutting some heads off over this issue because they felt like it was sacrilegious and it was just wrong. And so somebody wrote a book recently. Well, recently, it's about 20 years ago. I read it after I got beat up as an expert witness in court one time too. One of my friends bought me that book. And you realize science is not a place for wimps. You can get beat up really bad. And Dave has gotten beat up. Nick Norwitz, Adrian, Matt Budoff got beat up way back when he was looking at calcium score. He's still getting beat up for looking at things that are, quote, fringe and may not be part of the standard knowledge. So here's what they found. So a couple of days after we had dinner with Dave in San Diego, he dropped some of the publication materials, and now the publication's coming out. And here's a few things they found. LDL is conditional. What does that mean? If you've taken statistics beyond introductory statistics, you may know what conditional probability means. Let me give you an example. Jesus has got me doing this 100-egg video where it's you could call it an experiment, N of one. You could call it a stunt. You could call it a public service for proving that eggs don't hurt you. But basically, I'm on egg 89 in less than a week. And I'm not quite so, I usually love eggs, but I'm not quite such a big fan of eggs right now. So if you had gotten me when I was finishing my 5-day fast, would I have liked eggs? I would have loved eggs. But that was based on the condition that I had just finished a 5-day fast. After I've eaten 89 eggs in a week, I'm not quite so hungry for eggs anymore. So you find that sort of stuff in life all the time. What about LDL? It's conditional. And we've been saying this for a long time. It's conditional on what? Your metabolic health. So this patient that improved her metabolic health, these folks that are losing 30, 50, 150 pounds, their blood pressure's dropping. They're having to come off of blood pressure medicine because their blood pressure is becoming normal again. For them, these high levels of LDL really don't matter. They are not linked to cardiovascular plaque. They're proving that. Now it's in publication. And now the folks that have been saying, oh, you're just statin deniers, unfortunately, what they're going to do next is say, well, that's one publication. It's a research signal. It doesn't mean anything. We need a lot more stuff in there. And I get that. You know what? I'm an epidemiologist. That's one of the most common things I tell Jesus, and Nathan when he used to run the channel, and some other folks, plenty of docs and nurses that don't know how to review science. They'll see one article and they think, that proves it. No, it doesn't. One article doesn't prove it. And this one article on LDL is not going to prove it. There's going to have to be a lot more research before the other side, the typical lipidologist these days says, yeah, there's something here. Meanwhile, well, why do I go into a rant over something scientific like that? Because more and more people are going on a low carb diet, and more people's LDL is shooting up to 1 in 1,000 level, and more of those people are losing access to care because their doctor sees it, the doctor gets emotional, and the doctor starts screaming at them, and they leave the doctor. I know I overused this analogy, but it's like the 6 blind men and the elephant. You've heard this. I'm sure you've heard this before. The first blind man feels the trunk and says, oh, the elephant's like a snake. There's another blind man that's feeling the leg and saying, no, he's not. An elephant's like a tree trunk. And the other one's feeling the stomach and saying, no, it's a curved wall. Well, all of them are correct when they're within their own little world. But when they start making errors is when they get arrogant, which humans do, and they start saying everybody else is wrong. And unfortunately, people are getting hurt by that. People are losing access to medical care. And I just wish it would stop. People are being humans. I've met Peter before, Peter Attia. I've done some of this myself. Still have a video up with a thumbnail on it, and I've told Jesus we need to change it because it makes the wrong statement. It's got a picture of Peter, and it's saying they were wrong about cholesterol. The reality is they were right within their own world. Their world needs to expand a little bit. I think I'm getting so many comments here. Let me go back. Gosh, let me see if I can. Good morning, Bart. Good morning, Clark, Vic, Yvonne. Doc, I had a stroke in April and was wondering if it's too late to eat chia and flax seeds. I don't think it's ever too late to eat chia and flax seeds. Kim McKinley, watching from Cambridge, UK. Well, it's interesting that you bring up Cambridge. I mentioned a couple of the authors on this study, Nick Norwitz and Adrian Sotomoto. Nick and Adrian both got doctorates in human metabolism. So this is a very, very appropriate area for them to be focused. I was giving Adrian a hard time. He was there at Low Carb USA last week and gave us some great time, a great video, great interview. I keep giving him and Nick a hard time because I can't remember if they got their doctorate from Cambridge or Oxford. And, the issue is I keep confusing them because they both are trying to be the Hopkins of England. Let me see who else is making comments here. Remember to, Coach Jesus, remember to check out last video, number one. And there's Jesus. Remember to check out the last video, number one worst lie about cholesterol, if you haven't already. And we covered some of this in that video. Yvonne, I'm on medication for cholesterol, plus they put me on medication for B12. Well, I guess good. I don't know. One thing I'll say, Yvonne, is that there is no medication. Peter will say, and again, he's right in saying that there are 4 classes of medications. Statins are the classic. Bempedoic acid has now been developed. Then you've got the sequestrants and the PCSK9s. All of these things have been shown to decrease cholesterol. And if you truly believe that cholesterol, or quote ApoB, are driving the disease, then there's a simple drug answer to this problem. Unfortunately, we've had drugs for decades, and the problem's not getting better. They have not answered the problem. It's lifestyle. You cannot out-prescribe, out-stent, out-bypass, or out-supplement a lifestyle problem. And even within lifestyle, you cannot outrun a diet. Tech ADSR, good to see you. I get that from my wife. She keeps telling me that we have to eat carbs to stay alive. Yes, you do. You get it from your family members. You also get this. People start getting from a BMI of 30 down to like 25, and people say, "Oh, you look sick." Well, what we do is we show them their metabolism and their fractionation, their glucose tolerance tests, their insulin response, and their metabolism is telling them they're not sick at all. They are far better off than they were. And unfortunately, many go ahead and stop at that BMI of 25, and they should keep going to 23, 22. But our culture's messed up. We're sort of like corn-fed cattle. They finish cattle before butchering by feeding them a lot of corn. That corn actually causes what we call marbling. Marbling is fat in the muscle tissue. We actually get fat in the muscle tissue as well. And we don't call it marbling for humans. We call that diabetes. So ET himself much prefer a simple low-carb diet, healthy carbs. I do something very similar. I do healthy carbs. For the most part, I do like 100 carbs a day. When I did a couple of months ago, when we had our event down in Dallas, I went carnivore for a couple of months. Guess what happened to my LDL? It's normally like 55. 2 months on carnivore, it went up to 182. So I got some of that too. Lean mass hyperresponder business. So tech ADSR, moving goalposts, good for business. Yeah, and unfortunately, the medical industrial complex is a business as well. And the cardiology community has a major component of business to it. And good health is actually a significant threat to the cardiology community. Also, doing the right thing in terms of prevention is a significant threat because, again, you get people confused. They don't understand lean mass hyperresponders. You tell them, look, I don't want to get that stress test. That's not a great way to see if I have risk. Even the leadership in cardiology and internal medicine have said it multiple times, like the Internal Medicine Foundation, the American Heart Association, the standards committees have said over half of stress tests that are being done now, even in their perspective, should not be done. They don't have a good reason for being done. And that's assuming a stress test is going to tell you whether you have risk or not. They don't. Um, Jesus, I don't remember which video it is. I think maybe it's one of our upcoming videos. We go into detail about the 3 good ways to measure plaque. And stress test is not one of them. It's CIMT, which has its problems, calcium score, which has its problems, and CT angiogram. Roberto. Attila is using Mendelian randomization as evidence. Yes, so the lipidology community is looking at things like Mendelian randomization. I've seen those studies. I've also read Tom Schneiderman's articles. And I'm going to go on record as saying, I was telling Nathan a few months ago, I was going through this and I was saying, I could not agree more. With what? And it said, it doesn't sound like you're having a debate with Peter or Schneiderman or Dayspring. And I'm really not. I could not agree more with the point that ApoB is a better indicator of cardiovascular disease than LDL. And you'd have to go a little bit deeper into the particles to understand why. Those particles, ApoB actually covers things we call remnant cholesterol, some of the larger particles, geek warning, IDL, VLDL, remnant cholesterol. Those particles, they're big, they're fat, they've got a lot of triglyceride in them instead of just cholesterol. HDL and LDL have mostly cholesterol. And you really want to know more about this remnant cholesterol with the triglyceride. Why is that? Because remnant cholesterol, high triglyceride particles, are indicators of metabolic disease. So yes, I cannot agree more that ApoB is a better indicator of metabolic disease than LDL. However, I would also say we've got far better indicators of metabolic disease. I mean, hemoglobin A1C, as bad as it is still a better indicator of metabolic disease than ApoB. Really, you need to challenge somebody's glucose metabolism, and Peter knows that. He's talked about it. And insulin response to that glucose challenge also is very, very helpful. The fractionation, much of which I learned originally from Peter and Dayspring, were very, very helpful in helping us understand the impact of metabolic disease on cholesterol. And yes, I've read the Mendelian randomization studies. I'm not going to argue with them. And I'm also not going to argue that at some points and in some conditions, LDL does matter, and does matter a lot. There are other reasons to look at this, and it does have to do with genetics. There's a thing called familial hypercholesterolemia. And I'm going to quote a couple of numbers, and I got beat up on this the other day. So between 1 in 300 and 1 in 500 people or families have a gene called FH, familial hypercholesterolemia. To get geeky and technical, there's a thing called PCSK9, which allows us to clean up and burn LDL in our liver. You get a defect in that and your LDL can increase significantly. Now, most people, since this is fairly unusual, 300 to 500, most people just have one gene, but you can get 2 genes, one from mom and one from dad. And the other thing is, there's not just a single FH gene. There's actually over 2,000 of them. So it gets fairly complicated. The bottom line is, I get tons of people that have heterozygous or one gene from either mom or dad, but not both genes. Most of those people really don't have that much of an increase in risk until they start getting into metabolic health problems. Now, it's the people that have 2 genes, one from mom and one from dad. And so they really don't have any gene to help clean up the mess, to clean up the problem. Those people, homozygous FH patients, yes, they have heart attacks in their 20s, even their teens. So nobody could look at that number and that fact, that reality, and say LDL doesn't matter. Anyhow, I see I'm going way over. We wanted to keep this to about 20 minutes. Let me just cover a couple of other things about the study that came out. Number one, Nick and Adrian and David will be coming on board the channel, I think, in a couple of weeks. Number two, as we said, LDL is conditional. That's what they're finding. It depends on your metabolic health. If your metabolic health is good, LDL is not really associated with forming plaque. If your metabolic health is bad, it is the higher the LDL, the more plaque you seem to be developing. So again, that's what many of us have been saying for a long time. Another key issue, low carb is associated with metabolic health. People want to beat up on that. And you get into the arguments. Speaking of arguments, I'm not going to go down the bunny hole of getting into the argument about plants versus animal sources. I'm even going to get banged for saying low carb is associated with metabolic health. But I'm just saying, look at the data, look at the evidence that's coming out. One other thing, Lp(a) doesn't seem to matter. Again, I would agree with that. I see that all the time, especially when it's under 200. This study raised questions about particles. And for those of you who have asked multiple times, well, Doc, why aren't you looking at oxidized LDL? Because we see that in plaque, and you can test for it. Oxidized LDL is not looking like it's an important indicator either. And again, we had some evidence of that from previous studies. We got more evidence in this upcoming study. So we'll be having Dave and Nick and Adrian on soon. I'm sorry, we've got so many comments and questions. I just can't get to all of them today. We will be covering, if you haven't seen our video on aspirin, check it out. It's been very, very popular. It goes into some detail, and it goes into things like atrial fib. We discuss cardiovascular inflammation in it as well. And as Jesus said, take a look at that last one about cholesterol. The biggest lie about cholesterol. It has to do with this study. Thank you again for your interest. And don't let Tony the Tiger take over your dinner. And get him out of your breakfast as well. Let me see if I can figure out how to turn this off.